In the year 1901, a group of Greek sponge divers found something they could not explain. It was tangled in the wreck of an ancient ship. It looked like a lump of corroded bronze. Nobody thought it mattered. Then it cracked open. Inside were gears, dozens of them, precisely cut, interlocking, built with a kind of mathematical intelligence that had no business existing on a ship that sank 2,000 years ago. What if the ancient world was never as primitive as you were taught? You grew up with a simple story: Bronze Age, Iron Age, then, slowly, gears, clocks, machines. Progress moves in one direction, and it moves upward. That story feels safe. It feels obvious. It is also wrong. The wreck was found off the coast of a tiny island called Antikythera, in the strait between Crete and the Greek mainland. Sponge divers worked that stretch of sea for a living, walking the ocean floor in heavy brass helmets, feeling their way along rocks in the dark. One of them surfaced screaming. He described a horror show of corpses and horses tangled on the seabed. It wasn't a massacre. It was a Roman-era cargo ship, wrecked more than 2,000 years earlier, its statues and bodies fused into eerie shapes by centuries underwater. Archaeologists moved in fast. They recovered bronze statues, glassware, jewelry, coins. Museum curators were thrilled. Then, months later, someone examined a small, unremarkable lump of encrusted bronze that had been set aside in storage. It had fractured slightly, and inside it they could see teeth. Gear teeth. Nobody in 1902 knew what to do with that. The device didn't fit the timeline. Gear work like this wasn't supposed to appear until medieval Europe, over 1,000 years later. So for decades, the object sat in a museum case in Athens, mostly ignored, occasionally photographed, never truly understood. Then came Derek de Solla Price. Price was a British physicist turned historian of science, and he became obsessed with the fragments. Starting in the 1950s, he spent nearly 2 decades studying them, eventually using X-ray imaging to look inside the corrosion without destroying the object. In 1974, he published his findings. The device, he argued, was an astronomical calculator. It tracked the movements of the sun and the moon. It may have even predicted eclipses. He called it, quite simply, an ancient computer. Did people actually believe him? Not entirely. Not at first. Some historians were skeptical. The claim seemed too large for the evidence available at the time. Bronze corrodes. Gears fracture. X-rays from the 1970s could only reveal so much. Price had built a compelling theory, but the machine itself remained locked inside its own ruin, its full structure still hidden. That changed in the early 2000s. A team called the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project brought in modern imaging technology that Price could only have dreamed of. High-resolution X-ray tomography. Reflectance imaging that could read inscriptions worn smooth by 2,000 years of seawater. The project was led in large part by Tony Freeth, a mathematician and filmmaker who had spent years trying to reconstruct the device's inner logic, working alongside physicist Mike Edmonds of Cardiff University. What they found was staggering. The mechanism contained at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, some no larger than a coin, cut with triangular teeth by hand. It modeled the erratic, non-uniform motion of the moon using a clever pin-and-slot mechanism, mimicking what astronomers today call the first lunar anomaly. It tracked a 19-year lunar calendar cycle known to the Babylonians. It may have modeled the visible motion of 5 planets, and etched into its plates were tiny inscriptions, an instruction manual carved directly into the bronze, guiding whoever operated it. This wasn't a toy, it wasn't decoration, it was a working scientific instrument, centuries ahead of anything else known from its era. Here's the question that should stop you cold. If the ancient Greeks could build this, why does nothing else like it survive? One answer lies in what bronze actually was to ancient civilizations. It wasn't just useful, it was valuable. When empires fell, when armies needed weapons, when cities needed coins, bronze objects were melted down and reused. Statues, tools, mechanisms, all of it fed back into the furnace. The Antikythera mechanism likely survived for one reason only. It was lost at sea, sealed away from the very forces that destroyed everything like it. So the absence of other machines doesn't mean this one was unique. It may simply mean it was the only one lucky enough to disappear. Some historians now believe devices like this weren't one-off marvels, but part of a broader, half-forgotten tradition. Ancient writers, including Cicero, described a bronze device built by the Greek mathematician Archimedes that modeled the motion of the sun, moon, and planets. That device was said to have been carried to Rome as a war trophy after Archimedes was killed during the siege of Syracuse. For centuries, that story was treated as legend, an exaggeration, a myth wrapped around a real inventor's reputation. The Antikythera Mechanism forces you to ask a harder question. What if it wasn't a myth at all? What if it was a memory of something real? A whole lost lineage of Greek mechanical astronomy that simply didn't survive the centuries. Researchers have spent years trying to reconstruct exactly how it worked. In 2021, a team at University College London, again including Tony Freeth, proposed a new model for the front face of the device, arguing it displayed the ancient Greek understanding of the cosmos, sun, moon, and all 5 planets known at the time, moving in cycles matched to real astronomical data recorded by Babylonian astronomers centuries earlier. Think about what that means. This device wasn't just Greek genius operating in isolation. It was the product of an international exchange of knowledge. Babylonian observation combined with Greek mathematics and Greek metalworking, compressed into a mechanism you could hold in 2 hands. That idea alone should reshape how you picture the ancient world. Not isolated civilizations, each guessing at the sky alone. A connected world, trading ideas as readily as it traded goods. And yet, so much remains unknown. No one has found written records describing exactly who built the Antikythera mechanism, or where, or for whom. Was it made in Rhodes, a known center of astronomical study in the ancient world? Was it built for a wealthy patron who wanted the heavens rendered in miniature, something to display and admire? Or was it a working tool, used by astronomers to calculate real predictions, eclipses, calendars, the timing of the ancient Olympic Games? Nobody knows for certain. The gears don't speak. Only the inscriptions do, and they were never meant to explain their own origin. What we do know is this. The mechanism represents a level of miniaturized precision engineering that Europe would not see again for over 1,000 years. When clockwork mechanisms finally reappeared in medieval monasteries and cathedral towers, they were, in some sense, reinventing a wheel the ancient world had already built, then lost. That's the part that should unsettle you the most. Progress isn't a straight line climbing steadily upward through history. It's fragile. It depends on fragile things surviving. A ship sinking instead of arriving safely in port. A wreck lying undisturbed instead of being scavenged for its bronze. A team of sponge divers descending into darkness at exactly the right depth, in exactly the right place, over 2,000 years later. Knowledge doesn't just advance, it can vanish. It can be forgotten so completely that when it resurfaces, literally pulled up from the seafloor, the people who find it can't even recognize what they're holding. So what does a 2,000-year-old bronze calculator really teach us, sitting in a case in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens? It teaches you to be careful with the story you tell about your own species. The past wasn't simple. It wasn't primitive by default, quietly waiting for the modern world to arrive and rescue it into progress. It was full of minds working at the edges of what their tools allowed, sometimes reaching further than history gave them credit for. The Antikythera Mechanism is a message from people who assumed their world would remember them. In some ways, it did. In far more important ways, it very nearly didn't. What if the ancient world was never as primitive as you were taught? It wasn't. It was simply better at keeping secrets than we ever gave it credit for.